All right. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, which time zone you're in. Welcome to our second part of our webinar series on policy and funding in 2025. Today's webinar, we will be focusing on state and city initiatives to secure funding for after school and summer programs. Some that were more successful, maybe in this past election or in previous legislative sessions, and some that we're excited to educate you all on what's happening in a couple other states around some different advocacy work that state networks and our other partners and cities are working on. But first, a few housekeeping notes on the next slide. Thank you. Um, if you are experiencing any delays in the webinar, just try closing out the webinar and opening it back up. Sometimes that's just an issue on running it on your computer. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop those into the chat. I see that folks are dropping in their names and their organizations that they're affiliated with. Feel free to continue to do that. But if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat to ask those questions or comments. We'll also be taking in and trying to answer as many questions throughout. We'll also have 10 minutes at the end of this webinar to go through any other questions and answers for our panelists. And the last thing, this webinar is being live streamed and recorded, and we will be sharing a link to the recording. And of course, the slides will be available at the conclusion of this recording. So we'll be sure to get that out to you if you've registered, which you have if you are here. Next slide, please. I am excited to do a quick kind of run through of our panelists here. We have two folks from their directors of the state after school networks in their respective states. We have Katie Landis here from the Georgia Statewide After School Network, Aaron Skeen Pratt here from the Michigan After School Partnership, and then we have our partners. Jorge Membreno is the Director of Youth Advocacy at DC Action in Washington, D.C. And finally, Jamie LaFuente Garcia is the president and CEO of the Andy Roddick Foundation located in Austin, Texas. So we are super excited. We've got our state experts, we've got our city and county level experts to share a lot more about what's happening in their areas and how folks like you can get involved. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, but first I wanted to start with a little context setting. When it comes to funding at the state level for after school, I know Eric Peterson on our team. Many of y'all probably were on yesterday's webinar around the federal work that's happening in Congress and in the administration around federal funding. Today's we're going to focus on the state and local funding. So we have a nice map here, and you will see this is a common theme in a lot of these slides, lots of maps. Sometimes it's the best way to display information. All of our red highlighted states here are states with what we consider funding that's dedicated to after school and summer programs at the state level. So their state dollars are using that to support those programs. The ones with yellow stars are states that have used that funding to sustain previous investments from the American Rescue Plan or the CARES Act during the pandemic. So those pandemic relief funds, they've been able to sustain a lot of those efforts with state funding. Next slide, please. So we are currently in that map showed 27 states that were highlighted. We've got 11 new states since 2022. So that's exciting to see the progress and the momentum around state funding. That total is over 5 billion. It's around $5.3 billion at the national level across those 27 states that support after school and summer, which is extremely exciting. Big shout out to California with their huge investment of over $4 billion in the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, obviously leading the way there. But plenty of other states, the 26 other states are really helping to expand access to after school. And also we've seen some ballot initiatives most recently in this past election in 2024 that have gone our way in supporting and expanding funding for after school programs. Travis County Prop A is one that we will discuss later on. Jamie from the Andy Roddick Foundation will give us a nice presentation and overview of the success there in getting that ballot measure on the ballot and also the passage of it and what it actually means for families in Travis County. And another one is the city of Pomona and Measure Y that passed in the previous election that dedicates more funding at that city level for youth and families, including after school programs. So that's exciting to see. Next slide, please. How is after school programming funded at the state level? So there's various ways that programs are funded. Sometimes it's through state budget appropriation. So annually, the state budgets that, or biannually sometimes, state budgets and legislators come up with those budgets and put money towards after school programs. Ballot initiatives are another way that we've seen both at the city and state level to secure funding for after school. State lottery funds and how those funds are doled out or spread across different programs is one way that we've seen a couple states actually utilize funds for after school. There's also the education funding formulas that sometimes put additional funding towards after school as part of the greater funding formula. Then there's also newer funding streams like recreational cannabis and kind of the revenue that's captured in the taxes around that and how those support youth programming. Next slide, please. So a few of these slides, the next slides are kind of just quick overviews and a couple examples. This is not a thorough example of what's happening in every state in all 27 states, but this is just a few examples. So these are states with state budget appropriations that have seen some success over the last 2 years. We've got 5 states listed there, including Michigan. We will hear more about Michigan's efforts to secure that 75 million this past year with that 50 million in annual recurring funding from Aaron. We've seen success in New Mexico and Texas, Minnesota, Alabama as well, and really helping to grow support for after school programs and the students served in those programs. Next slide, please. Another thing that we've seen some success around in certain states is summer specific funding. So Hawaii saw $20 million this past budget for this coming summer for programming, and Oregon also saw $30 million in state funding for summer learning programs last year and is hoping to expand that over the coming years to grow that pot of money for so that more students are served during the summer. Next slide. Tennessee is well, so sorry, I'll back up. State lottery allocations. Tennessee and Nebraska are 2 states that have been able to take advantage of funds that are coming in from the state lottery, whether it's unclaimed funds like in Tennessee. So every year there's unclaimed lottery funds. They've been able to redirect a lot of those funds to the state's lottery for education and after school programs. And Nebraska also has some funds dedicated to expanded learning opportunities grants at the state level through some of those lottery dollars. Next slide, please. There we go. Perfect. Cannabis revenue I mentioned was another way that we've seen funds supporting after school. Vermont has seen that. Illinois and Alaska have also been able to utilize the revenue created through the legalization of adult use cannabis and the taxes collected there to support after school and summer funding. Next slide, please. All right, so those were just a few different options that states have found that as far as ways to support after school and summer programs at the state level with state dollars. So moving into 2025, so we've seen like the 27 states that have funding. So what's that going to look like in another year at the end of the state legislative budget sessions this year? Well, there's lots of momentum. There's continued campaigns at the state level through a lot of the statewide after school networks. So if you are located in a state and you are not already connected to your statewide after school network, we'll share ways to get in contact, including that link down there, 50stateafterschoolnetworks.org. There's a contact kind of your network there, so you can find some information there. So that's exciting to see. We're hopeful that we will continue to see growth among states in after school funding. There's also, a need for greater state level advocacy. So both around the federal investments and protecting those federal investments, like 21st century in childcare, but also growing state and local funding to help either match those or supplement those federal investments. That's going to be front and center in the next year or two. And as I mentioned before, the statewide after-school networks are an extremely great resource in your states when it comes to getting involved in any advocacy efforts or just getting up to date, up to speed on what's happening. So encourage you to connect with your network through the 50stateafterschoolnetworks.org page. And with that, I am excited to turn it over to Katie Landis from the Georgia Statewide After School Network. Katie, you can take it away.
Thanks, Chris. And I will continue your advertisement for the statewide after school networks. I'm Katie Landis. I'm director of the Georgia Statewide After School Network. Um, you'll hear this more as I continue talking, and I know at the end, but if you are not familiar with your statewide after school network and you're here wanting to talk and learn about policy and funding, I highly encourage you to look up and find and get to know your statewide after school network. So now I'm here to tell you about what we are doing in Georgia. We are one of the examples today of where we have a little bit of state funding, but we have a big current push of what we are really looking for. Our context here of what we're really pushing on is I want to give a little bit of context around the last 3 years. We were really involved, GSAN, our after school network, with the American Rescue Plan funds. So those COVID relief dollars that came to the states, some that were earmarked for after school and summer learning, it was about $85 million here in Georgia. And we designed, alongside our Georgia Department of Education, a 3-year grant program, competitive grant program, exclusively for community-based after-school and summer learning programs. After we designed it, we administered it for the past 3 years, and that included not just administration, but professional development and the evaluation of it. Some quick highlights. Again, that was $85 million in grants to programs in communities across our state over 3 years. These programs had sites in 115 of our 159 counties. That's the little map you see there on the side, some real reach. And we had over 100 grantees, and that included 4 statewide grantees who were larger organizations such as the Boys and Girls Clubs Statewide Alliance, who worked across the state. And those grantees collectively served 87,000, over 87,000 young people each year. I give you this context because this is what we are pushing to be able to continue. We built something new. We have an infrastructure now that wasn't there before. We've seen really great success. And right now we are pushing for more of this. You can go to the next slide, please. And so this is what we are really pushing in our legislative session this year here in Georgia for some new state funding to continue this investment, continue this momentum and impact. Our legislative session is a 40-day session. It started on Monday. We're in day 4 of 40 right now, so it's kicking off quickly. That number one there, that is our number one priority, what they are hearing us talk about. They've heard us talk about for a year and a half. But now it's go time where we're really pushing on this. So we are asking for $20 million for what we're calling Boost 2.0 to continue the work that we've done with these COVID relief dollars. You also see we have another legislative priority. This is where we're really asking, I know in Georgia, like so many of your other states, out of school time, after school summer lives in a lot of different of our state agencies. And so we're asking for an interagency liaison to really be able to coordinate across those state entities to make sure that they're streamlined, make sure it makes more sense for the programs who are receiving this funding. One thing I think that is really big about this is we are not just doing this by ourselves. We are working with providers like all of y'all, so programs getting them involved, but even more so, we have a real presence at the state capitol. We always have, but we're working in coalition right now with the Georgia Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs and the statewide alliance of YMCAs, which it's not that those are the only 2 types of programs out there, but they are the 2 who also have lobbyists at the Capitol every day. And so our lobbyists are working in lockstep together for these 2 same asks. They're not hearing different things from us. They're hearing the exact same, which has been really important. Chris, can you go to the next slide, please? I'm going to hit on these quickly and apologize. I'm talking quick. I feel like there's a lot that I want to just show you around what we're doing, how we're approaching this. But I would say these are the main 5 ways that we are approaching our policy and advocacy strategies. These really have always been our strategies. They look a little bit different at different times. But one is we really rely on data. There's a lot of different data that we use. And again, if you're not connected with your statewide after school network, not this exact data necessarily, but types of data like this, they may have access to. And I know I have some links that might pop in the chat in a few minutes, but one is we have an out of school time data map on our website. Um, and it's not where all the programs are, but it's specifically where government funding is. So looking at that government investments that we have, where they are, but really more importantly, how many of our communities they're not in. Another thing that we are really leaning on this time is we have more data than we've ever had before, thanks to the Boost Grants program and the evaluation of that. So we're really looking at being able to lift up not just the reach of these programs, how many youth are served, but some of the successes, some of the outcomes, youth outcomes, the impacts that these programs are individually and collectively seeing. We also have a whole lot of fact sheets on a lot of different things. You'll see some examples of these in a minute of some of these key data points that we use. Beyond the quantitative data, we really also use that qualitative, those program and youth stories. Those are things that we need partnership with programs like y'all. We have the data, y'all have the stories. To highlight some stories, I'm going to give you an example later of what we call our OST stories. It is a series that we have. Throughout the year, we release one a month, but during legislative session, we release one every single Friday. It is a more in-depth case study that gives more of that color and feel around what one program in Georgia really looks like and what they're doing with young people. And then another way that we're really have lift up youth stories and youth voice and as well as family voice is we have a new video. It's a long video. It's 24 minutes, but it comes in different little chunks that even if you're not from Georgia, there's a whole lot of really great youth testimonials to check out on there, talking about why these programs mean so much to them and what kind of impact it's had in their lives. I encourage you to check it out. The link will be there in a minute. Our advocacy also really looks at direct advocacy. So how are we as advocates connecting directly with our lawmakers, key champions, key change agents? We also have a day at the Capitals where we encourage providers to come along with us and lift up their voice, connect with their lawmakers, and we really give them and y'all tools to do that. And then community voice. That is the same as the day at the Capitol, but really this is another great reason I think to be connected with your statewide after school network is we send out those emails. We let you know when the time is right to raise your voice, who the exact targets are, and set y'all off into action to go do that. Next slide. I just want to give you, I'm going to run through these quickly, but these are, again, just some of the main talking points that we really use in our advocacy right now. Again, just really lifting up the power of after school and summer learning, how it's improving academic performance and outcomes. Literacy right now is huge in Georgia, as well as reducing chronic absenteeism, supporting working families, building critical workforce skills, and improving physical and behavioral health. These are the four main buckets that we really talk in right now as it resonates with our lawmakers. Behavioral health is a big one. Supporting mental health outside of the school day is really big right now here in Georgia. Next slide, please. We also lift up data from partners like the After School Alliance with their America After 3 p.m. dashboard around the unmet demand in our state. Again, data that's available for everyone in all of your states. I want to also lift up another report that is from another partner that we use who has information from all different states, but 50 Can is an organization where they have a new report that looks at a lot of different parent reported things around education, not just out of school time. But one of the biggest things found in their national report was that one of the biggest places parents were reporting unmet demand was in the out of school time space. And so we're lifting that up as another partner in this space who really is seeing this gap. Next slide. Another key talking point that, again, this is relevant and resonate with everyone across the country is that this isn't in competition with early childhood. We're really looking at this as, how are we insulating a pipeline for kids from birth all the way to adulthood? And there is now research out there that really shows that this is not a either or, but it's really a both and it's that this cumulative impact when young people have early childhood experiences and high quality after school, they see double the impact. Next slide, please. Talking about funding. This is our graph of what funding government funding in Georgia for out of school time has looked like for the past little over a decade. You see a huge influx during the COVID years that has now gone away. And so this is really our main talking point around we have seen momentum, we have seen increased impact. We can't go backwards now. Next slide. This is just an example of our out of school time stories. Again, it's mixing some of the quantitative, but really some quotes, some real storytelling along with pictures of these programs. This is just one of many that we have highlighting one program in Georgia and the work that they do. Next slide. Again, all these testimonials, these you see right here are from two of our Boost grantees, really lifting up some of that academic impact. Again, that is really important to our legislators here in Georgia, that connection between the out of school time and in school. And so these are some testimonials that we've lifted up for that. And then last slide is simply just photos. This is another way that I think y'all can partner with your statewide after school network is we need y'all and we have data that you don't have. It is when we come together that we have the really powerful story of the hard data around the impact of these programs, but then also the stories of in lawmakers, local communities to really drive home why these are so important. I know I talked really fast and there's time for questions at the end. So right now I am going to pass it off to my colleague, Erin in Michigan, who can tell you about all
Thanks.
the success that they've had.
Thanks, Katie. I appreciate it. And I have to say that the 50 State Mott Network and After School Alliance is such a great resource for the state networks. We've been really able to learn so much from Katie and California and the other states that have gone before us to really help us to see success in the state. If we didn't have that support, we wouldn't have that. A little bit of context really quickly on Michigan. We are the statewide network for after school. And one of our big pushes is to ensure that all youth have equitable access to quality out of school time experiences. And when we say that, we're meaning before, after, and summer learning. When I started in this position about 4 years ago, we had zero funding with the state government, and we started very little. I really appreciate with Chris saying how great it is now with the 75, and we're not done yet. But we started 4 years ago at just 5 million. And I really want to talk about how we've grown, but also the strategies that we have used to get to that level of funding. I do want to say that the funding right now is 50 million ongoing is what we're hoping for moving forward. I'd love to get that to 100. However, those funds do run through the state. Previously, they ran through the Michigan Department of Education. And then our governor created a new department called the Michigan Department of Lifelong Education, Advancement, and Potential. Say that 10 times fast, MyLeap. And that is what houses the out of school time office. And so we actually have folks who are in MyLeap who are administering the grant dollars. So they run a competitive grant process and then help to work with the grantees. And then MASP also receives some funding from the state to provide professional development and other assistance to grantees, as well as to support folks who will potentially get funding in the future. Just real quickly, the way that I really look at advocacy is I think about it in terms of how we're going to engage policymakers. So that's the champions. But I think about it in terms of how we at MASP directly are going to engage with them. And what I need, as we like to say, we're the chief advocates for after school. And then what we need in terms of for our partners to engage with policymakers. A lot of times we'll refer to this as grassroots. So we have a really large coalition that includes the Ys, Boys and Girls Clubs, independent programs, 4-H, Parks and Rec, municipalities, etc. And really working closely with them for them to talk to their policymakers as well. But then really making sure also that we have the youth voice included, which is so important. So I think about this in terms of how I'm directly communicating, but then also how we are encouraging others to do the same and the resources and materials that they need to do that. So I'm going to give you examples of all of the things on this slide moving forward, some of the messages and materials that we've used, how we talk about the impact of state investment, and then also what we're looking at moving forward. I also want to say, just like I've stolen a lot from Katie and California and other places, please feel free to steal, take. It's all things that we want folks to be able to use to push for your state and local initiatives. Lucy, can we go to the next one, or Charlotte? So this is one of the first things that we have to make sure that we're doing is when we are communicating with our policymakers, we have to make sure that they have the data that they need. And with the funds, the state does not actually provide for funds for evaluation. So we were able to fundraise with private dollars to be able to support the evaluation. But similar to what Katie showed, the importance of looking at how much was awarded, how many programs, how many sites, how many youth, some of the benefits, what some of the demographics looked like. Again, really being able to show how the impacts show what we're doing. A lot of times when, and we started this even with the 5 million, frankly, a lot of times when funding is provided through the state or even at the local level, groups might get the funding, but they don't necessarily show how it's utilized, and making sure that policymakers are familiar with how it's being utilized. And when I'm saying policymakers, I'm talking about the state legislature and the governor in particular. It's really important for them to see this kind of information. Charlotte or Lucy, whichever. The next one is really making sure that we are talking about with our messages and tying it into what our legislature friends and our governor are interested in. One of the best things that I think we did that helped us to move from the 25 million mark to the 50 million mark is we actually put together a letter and materials for our governor, literally linking after school to every priority that she has. We didn't use our language, we used her language. So however she was referring to supporting working families, strengthening workforce, we then talked about how out of school time helps to meet those priorities. And then we're doing the exact same thing with the legislature. We have a Republican House, we have a Democrat Senate. And so depending on what their priorities are, we're making sure that they understand from a bipartisan perspective how after school is a part of that. I can obviously, there's also also policymakers that are interested in childcare, are interested in how we're helping to grow the economy. They might be interested in physical, mental well-being, or they might be interested from the education component. So again, being able to fit it to wherever they're interested. And this is something that we did. We sent it directly to the governor, and these are one-pagers, however, that we also have that relate to the legislative priorities that we've given to the legislature in testimony, but then also we give out to and post on our website so that out of school time programs and other partners who are interested in pushing for out of school time funding are able to share this with their legislators as well. So providing really those talking points is so key. Next slide, please. This is where we went to in that next year. So this is looking at once we got to the 50 million, as Katie did as well, showing how as we've increased dollars, we've also increased how many youth are being served. And a lot of times with the legislature and the governor too, being able to show this mapping data. As Chris said earlier, it's helpful to be able to show where the funding is going to, but also it's really helpful to be able to show how the funding has grown and in terms of the various areas that are being served. Next slide. Another big piece for us, because we have been pushing, obviously, for bipartisan support, and we've been pushing for the last few years to get us up to that 50, and now we're hopefully pushing to go to 100 in this next year, 100 million. But it's not just about asking the legislators to do something, asking the governor to do something, also about thanking them for doing so. So we've been really careful that once the funding had been provided each year by the legislature and the governor, that masked directly, as well as our partners, out of school time partners, funders, youth, etc., families, were also out thanking the governor, thanking the legislature. We just did along with the state government, Mass did a kickoff for the most recent grantees of, it's called 32N, the out of school time funding for the state. And a simple thing that we had them do was we printed postcards, thank you postcards for the governor. And everyone that was at the kickoff, all of the staff of the programs, actually wrote why they were thankful to the governor, what an impact this is going to have on their communities, what an impact this is going to have on the youth. And then I was able to give that to the governor's policy advisor. And so just simple things like that are, certainly even low cost compared to obviously a more expensive ad. But I will say this ad that we did last year, I think was very, very helpful, particularly because there was a lot of, there was contention, I will say, with a number of other groups who were unhappy with what was being funded, and we were obviously one of the ones who were like, thank you, thank you. Next slide, please. This shows the other piece that we really communicate a lot with policymakers, again, directly, as well as including our partner or asking our partners to do so as well. And this is to show the growth of the funding, but also to show the growth of asks. And that every time we have that ask that's higher, it helps us to get to that next level. So you'll see the initial 10 million, it was actually two separate allocations of 5 million, and those were American Rescue Plan dollars. The ask was 14.5 collectively. Then the 25 million, which was also American Rescue Plan dollars, was 42.5 million. And then the 50 million, we were able to really transfer over to state dollars. So it came from the school aid fund. And that's 50 million, but there was 78.4 in asks. And then 57 was what the competitive pot was, 75 total, but the competitive pot was only 57. And that was 127 million. So now when we're going into the legislature, obviously we're able to show not only is there the wait list, is there the demand, the need for after school, all of the benefits, but we can show that we have the people who want to do the work as well. We have folks who are going to be applying for the dollars, because that's also something sometimes happens in state government, particularly. They'll start a competitive grant program, or they'll start a funding program, and then nobody actually applies for the dollars, all of that. And so we're able to show, nope, we have the system in place. We have the out of school time programs who want to make this work for you. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we, as Katie said as well, in addition to just providing the messaging, we try to provide the opportunities for the out of school time programs and youth to be active at the Capitol. One of the ways we do that is through We Heart After School. And again, pretty cheesy, but it is asking out of school time providers to have their youth write Valentine's Day cards, thanking their legislators, again, for supporting after school and talking about why their program is so important to them, kind of their love letter to their program. Why is it so important? And then we do something, again, cheesy, but people love food, especially legislative staffers. We deliver I Heart After School cookies to targeted legislative offices. And of course, it's to committees that are and leadership that are relevant to the funding area that we're interested in. We also bring about 300 folks. That's what this picture is. It included 100 folks 100 youth this past year to our Capitol Day. And the purpose there is to show the power of the after school, but also to, again, provide that opportunity for communication from the grassroots. Then we have a policy conference that the state, our state chamber, the Detroit chamber does in May. And all of the legislators are there, all of the business champions are there, all the funder champions are there. So we also make sure that we have a presence there, whether it's a session or some sort of communication opportunity. The other thing that we do throughout the year, and the idea here is to have that cadence, right? So that there's that constant drumbeat. We have a year-long legislative session, or all-year legislative session. And so we have to consistently be thinking about how are we engaging them and keeping their attention. So we also have a time of year that we're encouraging them to go visit, encouraging legislators to go visit programs. We have a time of year that we're, again, writing letters and emails and whatever it might be, a social media push around after school, again, to educate about the importance of after school, but also about the importance of this funding. And then that helps me when I'm going in and making that ask for the additional dollars. Next slide. Katie also mentioned this, the importance of gathering stories. I showed some of the quantitative data, and also big shout out to America After 3. I encourage you to go to that website for data on your state, because the waiting list piece is really powerful to say how many kids would be involved in a program if one were available to them. But it's also really, really powerful to have stories from the programs. And so that's another thing that we've also really focused on is making sure that we have stories from programs, particularly if it's for ones that have received the state funding, as well as for ones that received 21st century funding. But we also are strategic in terms of looking at making sure like it goes to the governor, it goes to legislative leadership, so it's from their districts, as well as, for example, appropriations committee or other committee members that are relevant, making sure it comes from their districts as well, so they can see the power of after school, because all politics is local, right? Next slide. All right, next one is just really quickly. This is what we're pushing for in the future is our All in Michigan campaign. I mentioned at the beginning that we want all youth to have equitable access to quality out of school time. Well, 50 million, 100 million, unfortunately, is not going to get us there. We're going to have to look at a much larger investment in the future. But to be able to do that, we have to raise public awareness around the power of after school. So we have launched this campaign. You'll see an anthem video coming out soon, but this is supported again by a private philanthropy, but the state is also very involved in this. And the goal is universal after school. And so we're trying to raise awareness about the need, raise awareness about the benefits, and tell stories. Next slide. This goes more into it. And this is actually one of the students, one of the youth from a program in Detroit, who was one of our after school ambassadors. And so it's great being able to show them and show their power and their potential. And at Capitol Day, for example, she was actually able to meet the Speaker of the House and got a tour and all of that. And so those are great. You hear from me all the time, but with legislators and the governor, but when they hear from the youth, man, they are so much more motivated, I think. But these are the types of things that we're doing through the campaign. Again, it's an educational effort specifically to talk about the power of after school and raise public awareness. That's it, I believe. And I am going to hand things over to my friend Jorge in DC.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you everybody for being here today. I'm Jorge, he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Youth Advocacy at DC Action in DC. Next slide, please. So very quick background on myself to just give you some framing as to how I approach advocacy. I come from a mental health clinical services background, but within that space, I was working as a school social worker. I was working in housing, providing housing programs for LGBTQ youth here in DC, building a clinical services program to create accessible mental health programs. And so most of my work has really been about creating access. So when I got to DC Action and all of it's about advocacy to create equitable access for our young people, I couldn't have been more excited. So within our organization, I would say our youth advocacy team is broken up into really two major coalitions. One's our OST coalition, which is what we'll be talking about today. And the other one is our Youth Economic Justice and Housing Coalition, which delves into career readiness, mental health, homelessness, expectant parenting, youth. I mention this because we try to take an approach of connecting the dots across all of these policy issues, knowing that if you change one thing, how does it affect something else? If you move dollars in one area, how does it move dollars somewhere else? I also say this because DC is so interesting in that we're not a state. We've got about 700,000 people within the city / I will say state. But it also means that whenever we are looking for funding, a lot of it is local based. As Aaron said, local politics matter. And that's a lot of what we have. And of course, we're at the seat of the Fed. but a lot of our funding for OST comes from direct local dollars with obviously some funds from 21st Century and other funds. And so our OST coalition is comprised of a lot of the providers that we have within DC. I think overall in DC, we've got about 130, 140 OST programs. And then we've got other folks who provide OST programming as well, whether it's money coming from DC Public Schools or OSSI or the Department of Parks and Recreation. Everyone is working towards some level of OST, but then the funding streams themselves are delineated either through the providers who receive grants through the Learn 24 office, which is our local office here for OST, or it could be that the Department of Parks and Recreation have their own OST dollars, or the DC Public Schools have their own OST dollars. The other thing I will be talking about today is universal after school for all. As Aaron mentioned, we are on that same track of, we know we've got these programs available. We know how amazing our providers are. We know the benefits of OST. I don't have to tell all of you. And so we want to make it accessible to everybody. Next slide, please. So in the district right now, we've got about 37,000 public school students who are participating in after-school programs and about 32,000 who are in publicly funded summer programs. To get back to the numbers a bit, as folks have said, there's those waiting lists, there's lack of access. And so we boiled these numbers down to say, for every young person who is in an OST program, there is somebody who is waiting to access an OST program. So 43,000 students lack access to after-school programs and 57 to summer programs. If you think about the map of DC, it's broken up into 8 wards. Think of it as like 8 neighborhoods / districts. We've got 8 council members who work within those spaces, 4 who are at large, which means that they help govern across all of DC, and 1 chairman. This is important in that when we talk about disparities that we see in the city, sometimes it is district or / ward based, and that's like historical disinvestment, institutional and structural racism, all of the areas that we all know too well, but we'll dig into the solutions that we're looking at within that space too. So what we have noticed is, if we're looking at that again, that map of DC, in wards 7 and 8, Black youth face significant barriers because of this disinvestment. And so we also know that there are fewer OST seats within those areas. So what are we doing and how are we tackling that? Next slide, please. So to get there, I think everybody has quoted money, and it's the thing that we all need to get there. Obviously, there's administrative advocacy, which we need. But the goal of universal OST means creating access for everyone, and with that comes the price tag of about $276 million. A large number, totally understandable. The goal is to get there by 2035, and that means we need about 131 million for after school and about 145 million for summer. So about a year and a half, 2 years ago at this point, we introduced the universal OST bill with one of our council members, Councilmember Fruman, who is the representative of Ward 3, again, of 8 wards. And so the goal of the legislation itself is to increase access across the city, but be able to do that in a way that is growing and scales up, not an all at once. In speaking with our providers, when we were drafting this bill in partnership with Councilmember Fruman, we asked, like, what does ramp up look like? What amount of money would we need for ramp up? What are the regulations around being able to hire staff? What is the administrative advocacy that we need to do to make sure that programs can adequately staff up? Like, if we dropped right now $276 million in the city, could our providers do that? And so what we thought about is like, all right, then we need to do a scale up model throughout the next 10 years to be able to get there. We had our first hearing, thankfully, on the bill on November 21st, and it was, I would say, incredibly exciting to see the amount of providers, advocates, the After School Alliance came out, and most importantly, young people came out and testified on the impacts of OST. As Aaron also mentioned, like the impact of a youth or a young person speaking to a legislator and saying, I love after school programs, I love summer programs, I love, X, Y, and Z because was incredibly like beautiful to hear, and like how galvanizing that message is across all youth within the city. So we had about 100 witnesses that day, and within the DC Council structure, you can submit, either in-person or virtual testimony, but you can also submit written testimony. And so we also had a lot of testimony that was sent in from young people and providers and advocates and city officials as well to try to really move this bill into law. Now, the DC process is interesting in that, we've got this first hearing, we've heard all of these comments. There are some changes that we'll need to make to it, which means that we'll reintroduce the bill this council year, hopefully, for another hearing and then also another day of feedback. Next slide, please. So, as of right now in the DC process, we are approaching performance oversight and budget oversight season. That means that advocates, providers, anyone and everyone who's got a stake within DC is gearing up to talk to council about what is working and what is not working in the city. One of those things, obviously, is OST programming, education, funding. And so I would call this the second bite of the apple. So part of our advocacy strategy in our November 21st hearing was talking about the oversight parts of OST in general in the city, but then also tying it back to how universal OST could really be beneficial. And so this second layer, when we're talking about performance oversight, when we're talking to our council members about what's working, what's not working in the city, we're trying to tie universal OST back to their specific policy issues. I'll give you an example. One of our council members is really focused on safety and security in the city, especially for our young people. We're like, fantastic. Did you know that universal OST offers an opportunity for young people from 2 to 6 p.m. to be engaged in a program to create opportunities, academic achievement, social and emotional learning, and be able to facilitate more protective factors around them? Another council member is really interested in academic achievement. We're like, well, did you know that universal OST, you all know this, you have all done this before. And so as we're heading into this, we're tying all of our testimony back to universal OST. And that means our providers who are part of our coalition. That means our young people who are also working on their testimony. That means all of the advocates in the city, again, who are advocating for more OST in the city. But we're hoping to get there within the next few years to sign this bill into law. And then we'll also simultaneously working on how do we pay for it. And that means that we're going to have to expand our reach to work with businesses, philanthropy, think about revenue raisers within the city to make sure that as we are prioritizing the needs of the city, we are also prioritizing the needs of our youth. Next slide, please. All right. With that, we'll leave questions for later, but I will pass it to my colleague, Jamie.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to cover the recent Affordable Childcare Now campaign that we ran last fall in Travis County to secure funds for early childhood and after school and summer programs. I think someone earlier was talking about the fact that you're not working against early childcare, and this is a great example of how you can work together and have a lot of success. So first, I just want to go ahead and give some background in the Andy Roddick Foundation. I'm the CEO of the Andy Roddick Foundation. We are an operating foundation. Our mission is to expand opportunities outside of school for our kids to learn, to thrive, and to succeed. And we create free national accredited summer learning programs, spring break camps, year-round family engagement. We also fund after-school programs at selected schools in Austin. And we are very proud to be the intermediary for Central Texas, and that's for 40 local after-school and summer providers. So we have a lot of different roles, and I think that's what really helped lead to some success here as well. Next slide. Like most of us, we're experiencing childcare crisis across the county, across the city, across the US. And what we're seeing in Travis County is we already have 5,000 children that are on our waiting list. That means that parents are waiting 2 years before they are joining the workforce. Their children are back into childcare where they can go ahead and develop and be able to really have all the resources and great things that come off of being in childcare. We also are seeing a lot of increase in childcare deserts. It was one thing in 2019 to already have a need, and back to that data of 1 child in an after-school program, 3 more that are on the waiting list. But since the pandemic, we've really seen doors close and an increase in the demand, but there's just so many deserts that we have to go ahead and do something different to change. Our absenteeism rates here in Travis County for school has doubled since 2019, and we all know that that's going to be a ripple effect that will lead to lower graduation rates and how successful kids will be after they're 18 and out of school. Economically throughout Texas, we have lost $9.3 billion annually because we do not have enough childcare. So we're thinking, how do we solve this problem? We don't have state dollars. How can we go ahead and do something different? So next slide. Our solution was really to be in a place where we're asking for our community to invest in our children. And really that was it, is invest in your children. There are so many great things that come out of childcare and children being in a space where they can be safe and they can connect. So we leaned in with a 2.5-cent property tax to produce $75 million annually. And that's going to give 10,000 slots for children across the county, focusing on areas of the greatest need. Also looking at non-traditional hours, so early morning, evening, weekend hours for childcare. And we wanted to make sure we're investing and strengthening the infrastructure, which is an essential part of building sustainability of quality and impact that affects not only the 10,000 new slots, but also the 625 programs throughout our entire city. So this is funding for home-based childcare. This is making sure that we are recruiting and retaining new educators through developing partnerships with local university and colleges, but also providing funds for shared data systems and youth outcome measures, coordinated and training programs, really just trying to go ahead and build up that infrastructure. And the last one is a match for employer contribution for employee childcare costs. So next slide. A little bit of background, I'll run through this really fast. I know we're running out of time here, is it was great that Austin, we had 2 coalitions. We had a network for after school and summer program providers back in 2000 when it started, and United Way also had a coalition for early childhood providers. And this was instrumental when we needed to go ahead and work together to drive this campaign. In 2023, United Way collaborated with the Children's Funding Project. And I'll say that again, the Children's Funding Project. They were fabulous in really developing a cost model for what we needed here across the county to have success for more children and planning for a ballot initiative. Early last year, the Andy Roddick Foundation was asked to go ahead and join in this effort, really looking at cradle to career. We all know that, if we can go ahead and make sure that children are receiving services from birth until they're 18, we can really set up our community and our children for success. So in May of last year, we presented to the court. By August, we were in a place where we received a unanimous approval from our commissioner court to place the initiative on the November ballot. I mean, that was really huge. If you go to the next slide, you can see how excited we were. Everyone, we've got the city, we got our mayor here, we've got city council members, our commissioner court was here, we've got providers, everyone really came together to be able to go ahead and say, first time ever, right? Something like this was going to be done in Travis County. And the beauty was, one of our commissioner said, 20 years later, we will look back on this day and we will know what we did to pivot and change the trajectory for success for our kids. So next slide, our role as a foundation is really to go ahead and be the voice for the network, make sure that we were collecting the information from all of our providers to sit at the table and be able to summarize what our needs were, the data of opportunities. You've heard this throughout the whole presentation today. Collecting data, opportunities, gaps, what's the waiting list, how many kids do you have in the program, what are your impact points, what is it that you need in order to expand your capacity. We were also helping to open doors, advise on the needs that we need to make sure are in the proposal, help to strategize, mobilize the network of after school and summer providers. This can get really, really busy really fast. So how do we have a common message throughout our entire county that really help the community to understand what the need is for after school and summer and why it's so important? We were able to also help with being the voice. We released op-ed for a call to action to really make sure voters were coming out and casting their ballot. We were able to do a campaign video with Andy. And this was something that we could stream on like Hulu, do text messaging across the entire county to really make sure when parents and I guess the community was coming to cast their vote, they understood what they were voting for. Because y'all all know that November was a very lengthy ballot. Next slide. I'm sure you're sitting here thinking, how could you help? Like if you're not really the one that is starting this initiative, or even if you are, right? What is the important takeaways for you to go ahead and get prepared for something like this? Again, this has been mentioned. Be prepared to share your data. This is really important. What data do you currently have that really tell that story? But you need the storytelling with the data. So making sure that you have parents that are ready for testimonials, youth that can share about their experience and why it has helped them develop them to who they are today. Public comment. A lot of times we shy away from those 2 to 3 minutes of public comment, but they mean everything to really make sure that our officials, our elected officials understand why the work is so powerful. Making sure that you have your social media so you can send out messages very easily, spread the word, champion your parents. They're already your champions. Help them easily be able to spread the message that something like this could be, on the ballot and have success for your community. After School Alliance does a great job of having a lot of information for Lights On After School. Use that time to bring in your city and county leaders. What you want them to do is be able to see it for themselves. So when they're up there talking about the work, they're really understanding the impact. Next slide. And I'll conclude here real quickly. I know we're running out of time, but you fast forward 2 years of putting all of this in action. And on November the 5th, we were successful in passing this proposition. It was a united bipartisan proposition. We did not have any opposing groups. We were able to bring the entire community together. You saw the mayor's office, city officials, county elected officials. You saw community leaders stepping up to go ahead and lead this initiative. You saw school districts all coming together. We had to do something different for our children, and we passed with 60%. And now we have $75 million annually that will go and be invested into this work, which is absolutely fabulous. Next slide. And I just want to go ahead and conclude this by saying that, this is a huge thanks to the Children's Funding Project, to United Way, to Kathy McCourse, who really led this initiative, but also to so many of our city and county elected officials. One of our commissioners said it best. He said, "My children that are in programs are not my children that are having problems. They're not the ones that are in trouble." Again, you need for your elected officials to be able to go ahead and really understand the value and speak to it, so it's really heard across our community. So thank you for your time, and I hope this helps to bring some light to a path that will be coming your way to your community soon, and you can go ahead and have a successful ballot proposition, some other way of investing in our children. So thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris for some final minutes with questions and answers. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you, Katie, for sharing all of your wisdom. We've got a couple of minutes, so we're going to try to do this. 2 things. One thing, we heard a lot about the after-school networks. Had a poll question here for folks that are still on and want to shine light into how engaged you are with your statewide after-school network. Some folks might already be connected. We'd love to hear how you're connected or how you're engaged. If you're not engaged, we'd also love to hear how we can better connect you. We'll drop in, I think at the end of this webinar, we'll direct a lot of folks here to the statewide after-school network's website. So if you are interested in connecting, you can do that there. But I've got a couple questions. First question, this is for any panelist that wants to take this up. And it's from one of our attendees. When it comes to communicating impact how do you strategically engage terminology? So the many different terms we've heard: after school, out of school time, after 3 p.m., expanded learning sometimes. So this person was asking from the lens of grant writing and storytelling and data and impact. So just looks like Katie, you might want to answer that one.
Sure, I'll jump in, and I know other people will probably talk. I'll say you probably heard me use a lot of those different terms. It's because we really vacillate between them, between who we're talking to. I will tell you, in Georgia, when we are talking to lawmakers, we say after school and summer learning. That is what's resonated to them. Out of school time feels wonky to them. They're not really sure what that means. We use out of school time a lot when we're talking to our funders who are more deep in the work. That's the term we most likely use, but we do really switch it up depending upon who we're talking to and what some of our goals are at that moment.
Thanks, Katie. Anyone else want to take that one?
I would just say ditto to what Katie said. Just really depends on the audience. And to me, that I'm always looking at what my end goal is, which is getting the youth access. So you can call it after school, you can call it out of school time, whatever gets us and serves our purpose.
Thank you. And I know here's another question for y'all. I know Jamie touched on this towards the end on how to get involved. But if any of the other folks from the state networks or Jorge, you want to chime in. So what are some suggestions that you all have to after school program leaders or staff that might be listening on how to get involved in these advocacy efforts? We've probably got a lot of folks that are now like engaged and willing and wanting to kind of get involved. What are some pieces of advice you might have?
I'll jump in again. I would say, I think simply just if you don't know your after school network, look them up. Sign up for their newsletter is a great first step. If you have a city intermediary, do the same. But then when it comes to advocacy, I think the number one piece of advice we give to providers is they're humans. They are people. They are not experts on out of school time. You are experts on their program. And they genuinely, regardless of where you stand on a political spectrum and where they do, we all want what's good for young people. They want to know what's happening in their local communities. They care about what's happening in their local communities. So our number one thing is reach out and invite them to come see your program. That is what we always suggest above everything else. Invite them to see when they're home in district to see your program.
Yep,
And
completely
Chris,
agree with that. Go ahead.
I was just going to go ahead and add, I think it's important for us to realize too, with after school and summer programs, we've come so far with data. We finally have it. And so I know that providers, you have so much in front of you. You've got to go ahead and do the work and make sure that you're able to speak to what's going on in your city and in your county. And this is again where um, your state groups work really, really well because they have a lot of that already collected. They are people and they just want to go ahead and hear that outside of the school day, our kids are learning and they're connecting and they're staying engaged. Like that's what they want to hear.
Thank you. Thank you all. So this concludes our webinar today. On behalf of our team at the After School Alliance and our speakers, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for hopefully getting engaged. And as our speaker said, there's always an opportunity to work with your state networks or your city intermediaries. And as always, you can sign up for our latest news at the link below, and I think you'll get redirected as well to the 50 State After School Network. So thank you so much.
Thank you.